Hi everybody, Joe Konkoly in the shop. Today, Andy Wilson and I are going to talk about ukuleles. Ukulele setup and strings and any other little tidbits that we can think of to throw at you here. Because, of course, this week is Ukulele Camp week. I'm down at Olivet College in Marshall, Michigan, sponsored by Elderly Instruments. So, there's several fairly common concerns that we see in the repair shop here with ukulele setup and other similar things. What is the ideal ukulele setup? It varies depending on what you're trying to accomplish with your ukulele, your playing skills, and what kind of playing you might do. And so the first thing that I see is that there are a number of different, there's a range of string heights that will work depending on what you're trying to do. In general, in the repair shop here, we try to set up a ukulele with a string height at the 12th fret from the top of the fret to the bottom of the string at 3/32 of an inch. And that assumes that the relief in the neck is proper and the nut slots are cut properly. And so, but certainly it can be set up higher and still be quite playable. Not very often can it be set up lower and still be playable, or still be buzz-free.
But it does happen, I've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to accomplish, is a string height that is easy to play with your left hand, but gives you some dynamic range with your right hand, so you can hit the string harder and get a little more volume when you need to, or play lighter, or if you're playing more intricate left hand work, this string height is not so high that you can't do that more intricate work. And one of the big things that I see, that, as I said, assuming that the neck has proper relief. What we're talking about there is a slight bow in the neck from here to the body joint, from the nut to the body joint, a slight upward curve. How much is slight? From 0 to 5 thousandths, is really ideal. So one thing that I see from a lot of ukulele manufacturers, and just see from ukuleles, is that neck relief is not always at that ideal situation. What I mainly see when it's not ideal is the neck is dead flat, which can be quite useful. But if you have that dead flat neck with no relief, it puts a little more stress on what you do with your right hand. So if you're looking for a low action and you want some dynamic range, a dead flat neck can create problems. And so most ukuleles do not have an adjustable truss rod, so it's not an easy thing to introduce that small amount of relief. So when we're grading and looking at new ukuleles and we're trying to set them up, a lot of times we will find acceptable a dead flat neck and set it up with that 3/32 ukulele. And if you're looking for that lower action and trying to play more, and it can cause some buzzing. So there is a there is a way to deal with that, but it's not straightforward. You have to heat press the neck back, which is to take and introduce heat to the neck and clamp it. And as that heat softens the glue joint between the fingerboard and the neck and just makes the neck a little bit more pliable, you clamp it into that shape with a little. And that is a inexact science and can take some time. And so there's that. So am I hitting all those points right as far as those?
Yeah, it's right. A lot of people, I think, make the mistake of thinking they just want, incredibly low action so that it's easy to play. But if you have a flat neck and that action is too low, it may play without buzzing, but you just can't lay into it and get that dynamic range. I actually prefer a uke with a little bit higher action, because it really, at the end of the day, doesn't take that much force to get that nylon string down to the board. And if you have a little more room to play with it, you get a lot more dynamic range, and you can lay into the uke a little bit more.
Yeah. So I think the range of acceptability on a ukulele is a little bit wider as far as setup goes than it would be on a steel string instrument with a longer scale, which is harder to press down. You need a certain action so you can easily get the strings, pressed down to the fret with the right amount of tension. So that also brings up the idea of what kind of left-hand tension do you need to make the string ring out properly, because it's a short scale instrument with nylon strings. So it really doesn't take that much strength to press it down to get the note to sound out, and you can overdo that, right?
Many people do press too hard. Usually as an effort to get everything correct, you start squeezing really hard, and the truth is it doesn't take that much to get it. You just got to get it to that fret. And when you start pressing too hard is when you start pulling the instrument out of tune. You start working way too hard with your left hand. Now you're getting fatigue when you shouldn't have to. And you start to realize if you just look at each one string and just press it down to that fingerboard, you realize that it just doesn't take very much pressure.
Yeah, so you can press it down to make it sound out, or you can press too hard.
And up it goes.
And you're actually changing the tuning on that instrument. It's very similar to bending a string.
And people will end up pressing forward and backward on the string when you're pressing too hard. When you develop that lighter touch, your hand will last you a lot longer, and your instrument will sound a lot better.
Which leads me maybe a good segue into our next repair issue, which would be getting the instrument to play in tune.
Right.
And as I mentioned a few weeks ago, it's probably 3 weeks because we missed one last week. I know some of you were anxious there, but we're back. We were talking about tuning machines on steel string guitars, where if you have a tuning issue, it isn't necessarily the tuner that could be the problem, but it could be you. It could be your hands and your ear and your brain and coordinating all that. And the things that you can do to play in tune, one is just to play with a proper touch. And with a nylon string, it's even easier to move it around and manipulate it, like Andy was talking about.
And the short scale adds to that too.
Yep, and the short scale. So all those things are exacerbated with a nylon string short scale instrument. Makes it a little harder for the individual to play in tune. You have to be a little more sensitive. So it takes them. So, I was noticing the Romero ukulele there, that it has compensated saddle. I don't know if we can see that. It has a wave or curve to the top of that saddle. So that each string rings at a slightly different point, as opposed to all the other ukes we have here would just have a straight across, straight saddle. So that's one thing to look at. If your saddle is wide enough to be able to be compensated, which is to have this curve put into it, that can be one thing that you could look at as an upgrade on your ukulele to help it to play in tune better. But not too many ukes come with the compensated saddle.
And you have to keep in mind that that's just one possibility of what could be going on.
Yeah.
Some people jump to that, I think, too early. We were talking about, these nylon strings can have inconsistencies. I always try the inexpensive one first. The strings have to be put on correctly, and a lot of times, the easiest fix on a ukulele is to just change the strings. And even I've come across brand new ukulele strings that have intonation problems, and you may find a brand that's better than another or something, but
especially if you put a new set of strings on and you find one string in particular that just will not play in
that's
tune.
a dead giveaway. If you're checking them, say at the 12th fret, like even that C is a hint sharp even when I play it properly, and that is probably still within the realm of acceptable here, but no doubt that is a result of that string and not the instrument.
So the string can be inconsistent in its diameter throughout its length, which can cause that intonation problem. It can be, might have gotten kinked at one point, had a little ripple in it. There was something else that you mentioned before as we were talking about this.
Just a weak spot or even sometimes, you hardly ever can see it, but that string, in order to intonate properly, has to hold its tension evenly across its length. And anything that deters from that is going to cause, and these are problems with intonation, which shouldn't be confused with staying in tune. That's two completely different things. So if you tune each string to your clip-on tuner and they're all in tune, and then you go and you play a chord and it's out of tune, especially up higher on the neck, that is, again, could be a number of things. It might be your technique, but it may also be an intonation problem, which could be a result of the string, or it could be a result where something like a compensated saddle could help.
Yeah, and another thing, of course, how do you attach the string to the post? Ideally, attaching the string to the post properly does not affect the intonation, but is it straightforward to get it in tune, and will it stay in tune?
Yeah,
if you have too many windings around the post and they are not wrapped one underneath the other, and you do not have the string anchored in that post, that can make the string slip and not make it difficult to get in tune. And once you get it in tune, it doesn't stay there because the string stretches. And of course, nylon strings stretch way more and take a little bit more longer for it to stabilize and stay in tune. So let's say you have that situation, one string that is just not staying in tune, doesn't appear to be intonated properly. Change that one string, you got to make sure it's attached to the post properly. And
and this probably isn't something you want to do the morning of the big gig.
Because
I think people make that mistake. They haven't tried, they think, oh, I've got this big, I better put new strings on. And there are ways to get them stretched and to stay put, and I know people that do it, but if you're not used to it, you're probably better off to wait or do it a good week ahead of time and give those strings time to acclimate.
Yep. One of the things about wrapping each winding underneath the other one that ensures a good break angle over the nut, so that the string comes into the nut slot and angles down toward the tuner. You can see these where the string comes into the tuner at the bottom of that post, and each wrap is above it from there. That ensures that you get a decent break angle. If you don't have a good break angle there, the string is not seated that well into the nut, and it just won't ring out properly.
You want to drive the string towards the headstock, and you do that with the windings.
So there's some tuning and intonation issues. Setup. There are definitely different tuning machines themselves, and most of the time what we're talking about here is just maybe a personal preference about what you like to the ease of tuning. And there we have, what do we have here? We've
got two. These both have the friction
tunes,
which are the traditional ones.
A 1-to-1 ratio. There are no gears involved. This one has geared tuners, guitar-style geared tuners, where the post is at a right angle to the tuning mechanism, which comes out from the side of the headstock, as opposed to these that come straight out of the headstock.
And that will have a rather large ratio, usually 14-to-1, 16-to-1.
The friction tuners are 1-to-1.
1-to-1. Now the planetary option is right in between the two. It maintains the traditional look of the tuners coming straight back. It has a 4-to-1 ratio most of the time. There are some that are 6-to-1, and that can be a nice compromise between the two and maintain the traditional look of that headstock.
Yep. So you mentioned that we were just talking about any number. We were rehearsing a little bit before we started.
That's right.
Just barely. But friction tuners can be a problem for some folks, but you were talking about how if they're properly adjusted.
If they're good tuners and they're well adjusted, and most of them these days are good tuners. They can work quite well. The real trick is this little Phillips head screw on the back. If that tuner starts to slip, then that screw needs to be tightened. Of course, you always want to be mindful not to over tighten that.
Basically what that's doing is just squeezing both of these bushings on either side into the thickness of the peg head and creating some friction there so that when you turn it and move it, it'll stay where you put it.
And if it's too tight, it'll be hard to turn, and if it's too loose, it won't hold. So when you're using friction pegs, you know, it may be that once a year or so you may need to make an adjustment to that screw and or have a professional do it. You know, obviously all the normal things. You want to make sure you have a screwdriver that fits that screw well so you don't strip it. You don't want to over tighten it because you could crack the button. And usually 1/16 of a turn or an 1/8 of a turn is all it needs, and I go a little bit at a time until it holds properly and still moves easy enough for me to tune it.
And so, because we're trying to reach that little best point there, it has to be done on a regular basis.
Yes.
You got to check the tightness of the screws and the buttons several times a year, because each time you squeeze it, it compresses the wood in that in the peg head a little bit, and over time, you know, that loosens up as that, you know, it compresses again and again. The problem with a vintage ukulele of 50 years of age with the original friction pegs on it, at some point you can get to the point where it can't be tightened anymore. It's still not catching, you know, that you have to look at maybe a different set of friction tuners, or maybe upgrading to the planetary tuners. And you know, the guitar style tuners usually offer a inexpensive way to get that geared tuner. Excuse me. But most folks would prefer not to change the ukulele, alter the ukulele peg head, because of course you would need 2 screw holes to accommodate the 2 new screw holes. If we changed this instrument to the guitar style tuners, we would alter the peg head, which is I prefer not to make any alterations to an instrument when we're changing the hardware.
And if you're into these vintage pieces, just maintaining that look. When you're really into these things, you just know that that's what a ukulele headstock looks like, and it does not have those tuning machines sticking out to the side.
Correct. All right, so let's finish up here with strings and tuning choices. Another big request we get here in the shop is to take, I have this size of ukulele, which is traditionally tuned like this, and I want to, I'm used to playing this other instrument, or which has a different tuning, or I want to fit in with my group in this way, so I want to have it tuned this way but play this ukulele. All kinds of options. There are dozens of strings and tuning choices for ukuleles these days, which is great, but if you have all those options, but it can definitely make for some challenging choices, and which ones are possible and which ones aren't. The most straightforward one, Stanley, is what you would call the low G tuning.
Yep.
Which one?
This one here has the low G.
Yep. So you'll notice that this lowest string, which is usually tuned to G, is this is a wound thicker string as opposed to this ukulele, which has a smaller string on the end. So on my right, your left, is the wound G. The first string is the smallest one, out to the 4th string being the largest one. On this one, the high G, the first string and the 4th string are actually about the same diameter.
Yeah.
And then you get progressively, so this 3rd string here is the lowest one. So, what do you get with a low G tuning?
Well, it spreads out the voicing and makes it sound a little more guitar-like in my mind. Not necessarily the classic ukulele sound, but it's a big, rich, full sound. Where that's more of a traditional ukulele sound. You can also get some bass motion out of it, you know, where you hear that bass motion going at that, which just sounds different there.
Yeah.
And it's a very popular thing to do, and it's up to debate, and it's a great reason to buy a million ukuleles. You can have one in the low G, one in the high G, and most of us, not all of us, there are some that say, this is the best way, that's the best way. Most of us agree, oh, some songs sound better with that low G, and some songs sound better with that high G. But it doesn't change anything as far as if you're just making chords, you make those
Same
chords in the same fingerings, you get a different voicing of that chord.
Yeah. What about, so the next most common one that I can think of is standard ukulele tuning, and then, which would be what?
Standard GCEA.
GCEA, and then you might go to the actual guitar notes that would be the same as the first four strings on a guitar.
DGBE, which is typically a baritone ukulele tuning, but there are special strings made for tenor ukuleles that are made to tune re-entrant DGBE, so they still have the high sound.
Let's take a look at what we've got here as far as which uke is which. Let's see.
So these are the smallest one.
The
This
soprano.
is the soprano. And then here we have a soprano long neck. That's an interesting
So this is
option.
same size body, but with a longer scale.
You can see that neck is longer.
Yeah.
So that has the scale length of a concert ukulele, which is just over 15 inches. Soprano is just over 13 and a half inches. So the scale length, and when we say scale length, we're talking about the vibrating length of the string from the saddle to the nut, is going to be the same on that soprano long neck as it is on that concert that you've got next
So
to.
here's the next size up.
It's got a larger
concert.
body, but the
Larger
vibrating string length is the same, and you can see that it is. And then we have, you add another 2 inches, you get up around 17 inches for a tenor ukulele scale.
And the standard tuning for the soprano long neck, and the concert is all the same, the GCEA.
And so is it these
Okay.
days for tenor. I say these days because
Yeah,
it wasn't
these-
always that
okay.
way. And some people still, so other alternate tunings, some people still do the old-fashioned soprano tuning, which was A, D, F sharp, B. And you'll see instructional books from the 40s and 50s that say that's how you tune a ukulele.
But we could tune this instrument to either of those tunings without changing
Without
the strings.
changing the string.
Because it's only really a half step different.
A whole step.
Whole step different, okay.
Yeah, which is, I think a whole step is about the limit of your acceptable range of just changing.
So you have a set of strings on any ukulele, and it's possible to go from standard, usually down.
Down is a lot safer on your
Yeah,
instrument.
tuning down up to a whole step and still use the same set of strings.
And there are people that do, that's another common 50s tuning for tenor is the B flat tuning, which is just down a whole step.
Huh.
So it's F, B flat, D, G, and you will find books that had that tuning.
When you tune down on an instrument with the same set of strings, it makes the strings a little floppier.
Yes.
So they're going to feel easier to press down by the same tone. It's going to be easier to make it buzz depending on how much right hand power you add.
And maybe harder to keep in tune with that less tension. And it's worth noting, I think, that these different sizes also have different tension amounts on them. Unlike other instruments, you know, that when we go to this tenor ukulele, we're going to a 17-inch scale from what was a 13 and 5/8 inch scale on this, and we're tuning it the same, and the strings are not lighter, they're actually a little heavier. So a tenor ukulele has quite a bit more tension on it than a soprano ukulele. So while it may be easier to squeeze your fingers in between those frets that are spaced out different, it may be harder to press that string down, and it may not have as soft a feel as a traditional soprano ukulele.
There you go.
And everywhere in between, so that's why you buy 20 of them.
That's right. A feller just can't have more than You gotta have more than one uke, everybody. So.
Yeah, we like to
We do our
experiment
best.
with these things, and then there's also string types.
Yeah.
You know, you think of it as a
Nice.
nylon string instrument, but we actually sell strings for ukulele that are made out of nylon. We have, and there's black nylon and clear nylon. Those are on the mellower side of the spectrum. Then you have Nile gut, which most of these have, the Aquila Nile gut strings, which are a nylon-based synthetic gut. It's sort of in the middle. And then you'll find strings made of monofilament and fluorocarbon, which those are the denser materials, fluorocarbon being the densest. Those denser materials are going to give you a more clear and bright sound and not quite as much rich and warm. And they'll project really well. And there's going to be a lot of personal preference, and I find different ukes respond differently to those strings, and every time I buy a new uke, I gotta take some time to find what strings are going to be best on them. You know, I just recently got a new one that I thought was going to be good with fluorocarbon, and I didn't like the fluorocarbon on it, and I ended up with a nice set of nylon strings on it, and I'm very happy with it. I've got similar ukes, even some by the same manufacturer, that I prefer the fluorocarbon string, so it's always worth experimenting with those things.
Yeah. All right, so there's a lot of uke information right there, and as you can tell, that's really only the tip of the iceberg.
Yep.
So that's one of the fun things about ukuleles is these options and different things that you can do with them. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks for being here with me, Andy, and catch us in a couple of weeks. Like us and share us on Facebook. Thanks everybody. See ya.
See ya.